The misunderstanding. The Nalfori Confederation had encountered hundreds of spacefaring species during their 5 millennia of interstellar exploration. They had witnessed civilizations born of silicon, methane, and even pure energy. They had navigated the complex diplomatic waters of the Galactic Council with the calculated precision their species was known for. Yet nothing in their extensive archives had prepared them for the peculiar habits of humans. High Commander Valen stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, Harmonious Intent, his 4 eyes blinking in asynchronous patterns that indicated deep confusion. Below, through the transparent aluminum viewport, the human spaceport bustled with activity. Among the uniformed personnel and cargo loaders, a human female in an official diplomatic uniform was walking with a quadrupedal furry creature attached to her by a thin tether. "What is that primitive arrangement?" Valen asked, tapping a slender gray finger against the viewport. Science Officer Nalis consulted her datapad. "According to our briefing materials, Commander, that is called a dog. It is a domesticated descendant of a predatory species called wolves. Humans keep them as what they term pets." Pets. Valen's secondary eyes narrowed while his primary pair remained fixed on the scene below. "Elaborate." "Non-sapient companion animals kept for emotional purposes," Nalis said, her tone suggesting she found the concept as baffling as her superior. "Humans form emotional attachments to these creatures despite their obvious intellectual inferiority." How primitive! Valen's mouth tentacles curled in what passed for a smile among the Nalfori. This explains much about their stunted technological development. They waste resources on non-productive creatures. The human delegation would be arriving shortly for the first official diplomatic meeting, since Earth had been granted probationary membership in the Galactic Council. The Nalfori had been assigned as humanity's sponsors, much to their private dismay. Humans were impulsive, emotional, and by Nalfori standards, dangerously unpredictable. "Commander," Cultural Liaison Officer Terex interjected, "I should note that our briefing materials strongly emphasize that these pets are considered important to humans. They are advised to be treated as cultural artifacts of significance." Noted, Valen responded dismissively. "Though I fail to see how a primitive predator could hold cultural significance." When the airlock cycled open several hours later, the Nalfori delegation rose in formal greeting. 5 humans entered the conference chamber, led by Ambassador Elena Reyes. To the horror and confusion of the Nalfori, the ambassador was accompanied by the quadruped they had observed earlier. "Ambassador Reyes," Valen began, maintaining rigid diplomatic protocol, despite his shock, "we welcome you aboard the Harmonious Intent, though I must inquire about the presence of your non-sapient companion." Ambassador Reyes smiled warmly. "Thank you, High Commander. This is Atlas, my service dog. He accompanies me to all official functions. I have a medical condition that he is trained to monitor and respond to if necessary. Your diplomatic office assured us this would be acceptable." Before Valen could respond, his cultural liaison hurriedly whispered, "This was indeed cleared through proper channels, Commander." "I see," Valen managed, his skin shifting to a lighter shade of gray, a sign of discomfort among his species. "Please, be seated." The negotiations proceeded for several hours. Throughout, Valen found his attention repeatedly drawn to the creature called Atlas. It remained quietly positioned beside the ambassador's chair, occasionally shifting position, but otherwise displaying remarkable restraint for what he understood to be a descendant of apex predators. During a brief recess, Science Officer Nalis approached him privately. "Commander, I've been observing the canine. It appears to be monitoring the ambassador's physiological state. When her respiratory rate increased during our discussion of trade regulations, the animal placed its head in her lap until her biometrics normalized." "Fascinating," Valen admitted reluctantly. "A biological monitoring device." "More sophisticated than that," Nalis replied. "It appears to be making independent assessments and decisions based on training. There's a crude intelligence at work." When negotiations resumed, Valen found himself studying the interaction between the human diplomat and her pet with new interest. The animal occasionally made eye contact with different members of the human delegation, seemingly assessing them. Once, when the trade minister's voice rose in mild frustration, the dog shifted subtly closer to Ambassador Reyes. Ambassador, Valen ventured during a discussion of cultural exchange programs. I am curious about your relationship with this Atlas. Our understanding is that humans maintain relationships with these animals beyond practical functions. Ambassador Reyes smiled. That's correct, High Commander. While Atlas serves a medical purpose for me, many humans keep dogs and other animals simply as companions. They provide emotional support, loyalty, and unconditional affection. Cultural esoterics interjected. Our research indicates humans expend approximately 132.8 billion of your currency units annually on these creatures. Is this assessment accurate? That sounds about right, the Human Trade Minister confirmed. Pet care is a significant industry on Earth. Valen's mouth tentacles twisted in disbelief. Your species allocates economic resources equivalent to the gross domestic product of a small spacefaring civilization on non-sapient creatures that serve no productive function. A tense silence fell over the room. Ambassador Reyes' expression cooled noticeably. High Commander, she said carefully, I understand this may seem strange from your perspective, but companion animals have been part of human civilization for tens of thousands of years. They've helped us hunt, protected our homes, provided comfort during hardship, and even saved countless lives. Atlas here is trained to detect when I'm about to have a seizure before I show any outward symptoms. Without him, I couldn't serve as ambassador. Valen noted that as the ambassador spoke, the dog had shifted position again, pressing against her leg as if providing support. Fascinating, but still irrational by Nalfori standards. Perhaps, offered Science Officer Nalis, attempting to ease the tension, we could include information about human-animal relationships in our cultural exchange programs. It represents a significant divergence from Nalfori social structures. An excellent suggestion. Ambassador Reyes agreed, her tone warming again. In fact, I have a proposal. Tomorrow we're scheduled to tour the New Geneva Earth colony. Why not join us? You could observe human-animal relationships in a more natural setting. Valen's primary instinct was to refuse. The idea of spending additional time observing primitive creatures seemed wasteful, but diplomatic protocol and scientific curiosity prevailed. We would be honored, he replied formally. The next day, the combined diplomatic teams shuttled down to the human colony that had been established on the habitable moon orbiting Proxima Centauri. New Geneva was humanity's first extrasolar settlement, home to nearly 50,000 pioneers. As they toured the main settlement, Valen was astounded by the prevalence of these pets. Humans kept not only the canines but a variety of creatures, small felines that perched in windows, colorful avians that produced melodic sounds, and even scaled aquatic creatures that swam in transparent containers. This is extraordinary, muttered cultural esoterics, furiously taking notes. They've transported entire non-sapient species across interstellar distances for companionship. Their tour brought them to a residential district where children were playing in a designated recreation area. Several dogs ran among them, seemingly engaged in some form of organized chaos that produced high-pitched sounds of delight from the human offspring. We call this a dog park, explained Ambassador Reyes. It's where people bring their dogs to exercise and socialize with other dogs and humans. Valen observed a small female human child throw a disc through the air, which a canine then chased and retrieved. The process repeated multiple times, neither participant appearing to tire of the seemingly pointless activity. They appear to be engaged in a training exercise, Valen observed. Ambassador Reyes laughed lightly. No, Commander. They're playing. It's recreational for both the child and the dog. You engage in recreational activities with non-sapient species, Science Officer Nalis asked, her tone betraying her disbelief. Of course, the ambassador replied. The relationship is mutually beneficial. The dog receives exercise, mental stimulation, and social interaction. The child learns responsibility, empathy, and commitment. Empathy toward a lesser species. Valen couldn't keep the dismissive tone from his voice. Ambassador Reyes' expression became serious. High Commander, with respect, that perspective has led to significant challenges during humanity's history. Species we once considered lesser often reveal complex cognitive and emotional lives when we take the time to understand them on their own terms, not ours. Before Valen could respond, a piercing alarm cut through the air. The peaceful scene transformed instantly as colonists began moving rapidly toward designated shelter areas. Proximity alert, explained the colony's security chief who had been accompanying their tour. Unidentified craft approaching the settlement. Standard protocol is to move all civilians to shelters until we confirm it's not hostile. Atlas, alert, Ambassador Reyes commanded, and instantly the dog's demeanor transformed. The relaxed animal was suddenly alert, positioning himself slightly ahead of the ambassador, head high and scanning their surroundings. "We should return to our shuttle," Valen suggested. "Your security forces can handle this local matter." The security chief shook his head. "Respectfully, Commander, the nearest shelter is closer. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." As they hurried toward the shelter, Valen noticed something extraordinary happening throughout the settlement. The humans' companion animals were not creating chaos as he would have expected from non-sapient creatures in an emergency. Instead, they moved with their human counterparts, many of the larger dogs positioning themselves protectively near children. "Fascinating," murmured Science Officer Nalis. "They appear to understand the threat concept and are responding cooperatively." They had nearly reached the shelter when the distinctive whine of energy weapons split the air. From around a nearby structure, 3 armed figures appeared, clearly not human. "Pirates," the security chief hissed, drawing his sidearm. "Scavengers that hit outer colonies for tech and supplies." The situation deteriorated in seconds. The pirates spotted their group and opened fire. The security detail returned fire as civilians scattered toward the shelter entrance. Ambassador Reyes stumbled as energy blasts struck the ground near her feet. What happened next would forever change how High Commander Valen viewed humanity and their companion species. The revelation. Atlas transformed. The well-behaved, seemingly docile animal became something else entirely, a blur of focused aggression. Without hesitation, the dog launched himself toward the nearest attacker, covering the distance with shocking speed. The pirate, a reptilian Drosk mercenary, had just enough time to register surprise before 80 pounds of evolved predator slammed into his chest. The impact knocked the weapon from its hands and sent him crashing to the ground with Atlas's jaws clamped firmly around his forearm. "Take cover," shouted the security chief, pulling Ambassador Reyes toward the shelter entrance. Valen found himself frozen in place, his 4 eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. The dog had completely incapacitated one attacker and was now standing protectively over the fallen pirate, a continuous low growl emanating from its throat. The sound activated something primitive in Valen's neurological system, an ancient recognition of predatory threat that bypassed his rational mind. The remaining pirates focused their fire on the unexpected threat. Atlas dodged with remarkable agility, creating enough distraction for the human security team to gain tactical advantage. When a blast grazed the dog's flank, Valen heard Ambassador Reyes cry out as if she herself had been wounded. "We need to get you inside," Cultural Lays and Turix urged, pulling at Valen's arm. "Wait," Valen said, transfixed by what he was witnessing. More security personnel had arrived, and the skirmish ended quickly. The pirates were subdued, but Ambassador Reyes was rushing toward her injured companion animal with complete disregard for protocol or personal safety. "Atlas, medic, we need a medic for my dog," she called, dropping to her knees beside the animal. The dog, despite its injury, was licking the ambassador's face as she examined his wound. The sight was so alien to Nalfori sensibilities that Valen struggled to process it. A diplomatic official of significant rank was prioritizing the welfare of a non-sapient being over her own safety and dignity. More remarkable still was the animal's behavior. Despite being injured, it remained vigilant, positioning itself between the ambassador and the subdued threats, even as it accepted her attention. Science Officer Nalis approached cautiously. "Ambassador, our medical unit has skenobiological capabilities. We can treat your Atlas." "Thank you," Ambassador Reyes replied, her voice thick with emotion. "The wound doesn't appear deep, but I want to be sure." Inside the colony's medical facility, Valen watched in astonishment as the Nalfori medical officer treated the canine with the same precision and care they would offer any sapient patient. The dog remained calm throughout the procedure, its eyes never leaving Ambassador Reyes. "I don't understand," Valen finally said, approaching the ambassador as the treatment concluded. "It is injured, yet it continues to monitor your safety." "That's what loyalty means, Commander," Reyes replied, stroking Atlas's head gently. "He's not protecting me because it's logical or because he's been programmed to. He's protecting me because we have a bond." "A bond," Valen repeated, the concept both simple and utterly foreign. "With a non-sapient species." One of the human security officers who had joined them in the medical bay laughed. "With respect, Commander, you might want to reconsider your definition of sapience. That dog just outperformed your tactical response protocols." Instead of taking offense, Valen found himself considering the statement seriously. "Indeed, your companion displayed remarkable strategic assessment. It neutralized the most immediate threat while creating disruption that benefited your security team." "He," Ambassador Reyes corrected gently. "Not it. And yes, dogs have been working alongside human military and security forces for centuries. They're partners, not tools." "I apologize for the misclassification," Valen said, surprising even himself with the admission. "Your point is well taken, Ambassador." As Atlas recovered, Valen found himself unexpectedly drawn to the animal. With the ambassador's permission, he extended a tentative hand. Atlas sniffed his fingers cautiously before allowing Valen to touch the fur on his head. The sensation was unlike anything in Valen's experience, soft yet resilient, warm with life. More surprising was the emotional response it triggered in him, a faint echo of something his species had evolved beyond thousands of generations ago. "He's accepting you," Reyes explained, smiling. "Dogs are excellent judges of character." "A remarkable adaptation," Science Officer Nalis observed, having been monitoring the interaction. "The ability to form cross-species social bonds would provide significant evolutionary advantages for both species." The remainder of the diplomatic mission proceeded with a noticeably different tone. The Nalfori delegation requested extensive information about Earth's companion animals and their historical relationship with humanity. On the final day of negotiations, as both parties prepared to sign the preliminary alliance agreements, Valen made an unprecedented request. "Ambassador Reyes, our science division is interested in establishing a formal study of human-animal relationships. With proper ethical oversight, naturally. Would Earth's government be amenable to such an exchange?" Ambassador Reyes smiled. "I think that could be arranged, Commander. In fact, I have a suggestion. There's a program on Earth called foster care, where people temporarily care for animals until they find permanent homes. Perhaps some of your science team might consider fostering companion animals during your cultural exchange visits." The idea was so outlandish that Valen nearly dismissed it outright. Yet the memory of Atlas's actions, the loyalty, the courage, the apparent bond, gave him pause. "An intriguing proposal. I shall present it to my superiors." 6 months later, the Galactic Council chambers buzzed with astonished whispers as High Commander Valen presented the formal findings of the Nalfori study on human-animal relationships. Beside him stood Ambassador Reyes with Atlas, and at Valen's own side sat a small Earth feline with mottled fur that the commander had, to the shock of the Nalfori Confederation, formally adopted. The human practice of forming bonds with companion species represents not a primitive attachment as we initially assessed. Valen addressed the Council, but rather an advanced form of symbiotic relationship that enhances both species. Our preliminary research indicates that these relationships have measurably influenced human neurological development, particularly in areas related to empathy, cooperative behavior, and cross-species communication. The chamber erupted in murmurs as Valen continued. Further, we have documented numerous instances where these companion animals have demonstrated what can only be described as self-sacrifice, courage, and problem-solving abilities that challenge our current definitions of sapience. The Nulphora Confederation formally recommends that the Council revise its sapience classification system to recognize gradient intelligence rather than binary categories. Ambassador Rice leaned over to whisper, "You've come a long way from thinking Atlas was a waste of resources." Valen's mouth tentacles curled in what humans now recognized as a smile. "Indeed, Ambassador, your species has taught mine a valuable lesson. Perhaps true intelligence isn't measured by technological achievement or even cognitive capacity, but by the ability to form meaningful connections across boundaries." As if understanding his words, Atlas pressed against Valen's leg briefly before returning to the ambassador's side. The small gesture, a simple acknowledgement from one species to another, carried more diplomatic weight than 1,000 formal treaties. It represented a bridge across evolutionary gaps millions of years wide, built not through logical negotiation, but through something much older, and Valen now understood, much more powerful: respect. In the years that followed, the canine incident, as it became known in diplomatic circles, revolutionized interspecies relations throughout the Galactic Council. Earth became an unexpected center for xenobiological studies, with delegations from dozens of spacefaring civilizations arriving to understand the phenomenon of human-animal bonds. More significantly, the incident established humanity's unique contribution to galactic society. While other species brought advanced technologies, mathematical innovations, or philosophical systems, humanity brought something many advanced civilizations had lost along their evolutionary path: the ability to form profound connections with radically different forms of life. It was, as High Commander Valen noted in his memoirs, the moment we realized that humanity's so-called emotional weakness was, in fact, their greatest evolutionary strength.